Hey everyone, it's Rob. This is part 3 of our discussion on the issue of immigration. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, I really want to encourage you to go back and do that, especially part 1. In part 1, I addressed what is the Christian responsibility when it comes to immigration. What I argued was that if a Jew is escaping Nazi Germany, our response should not be, are you coming here legally or illegally? Our response should be compassion, empathy, care, concern. If someone's fleeing Mexico, Honduras, or some other country because they're in danger for their lives, or because they're starving, or because their children are being threatened, our response as a church should be, what can we do to help? And how can we help? The problem is, as soon as we make that plea, we're filled with all these arguments as to why we can't let these people in, why we can't let them into our country, why we need to have strong borders. And I'm not denying that we have to have strong borders, but in this particular episode, what I want to do is I want to address some of the common arguments used to defend the current administration's policy on immigration. Most notably, of course, is the accusation that they're all criminals. In fact, Trump said when he was campaigning, even during one of the debates, they're eating our cats and dogs. They're criminals. They're people that shouldn't be in our country. We got to get rid of them. Is that a fair accusation? Is that a fair representation of what's actually going on? Let me begin by noting that ICE has become very abusive. And this is what I'm addressing in the Revelation Revealed series that comes out every single Wednesday night. I'm trying to suggest that when you give unmitigated, unquestioning power, unchecked power to an organization, to a group, to a police force, to a military state, there are going to be repercussions, serious, tragic repercussions. You look at the war that's going on in Israel, Gaza, the IDF is acting with impunity. You look at the West Bank, settlers are acting with impunity. This is not good for anyone. Why should we not expect that when you give billions of dollars to ICE officials, when you give them billions of dollars, they're going to use it improperly. There's going to be problems. And the church has got to speak up and say, that part, that's not acceptable. That can't be done. Let's look at the alligator Alcatraz, that facility in the Florida Everglades. Reports are that detainees are being held in overcrowded, unsanitary camps. There's constant lighting, there's mosquito infestations, there's poor food, little hygiene. It's described as psychological terror. This is not acceptable. We must, as Christians, hold our government to higher standards. We must demand that all persons be treated with dignity, with human dignity. Oh, but they're here illegally. Not all the people in there are even here illegally. And it doesn't matter. Human dignity must be given to everyone. Now, another problem with the current administration's policy on immigration is that there's a very strong link between immigration and race and racism. For one, the current administration is saying anybody that speaks out about Israel or Israel's occupation of Gaza, or the genocide in Gaza, and they might be here illegally or might have any questions about them at all, they are being detained and sometimes shipped out of the country simply for exercising the right to free speech. Mahmoud Khalil was a green card holder. He's here legally, and the application of the First Amendment applies to him. He has the right to free speech. But the current administration's policies are disproportionately affecting Black and brown communities. Immigrants from Muslim majority countries and people whose skin color makes them suspect in the eyes of power. Furthermore, there's a denial of due process, which is guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment. It says that no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law by the federal government. The denial of due process, locking people up and deporting them without a fair hearing, undermines the basic principles of justice that our country was founded upon. Mahmoud Khalil, whom I mentioned a minute ago, was sent out of state. The law requires that if you're going to be charged for a crime, it must be in a court within the boundaries in which you committed that crime, unless you can't get a fair jury trial in that area. What's really deplorable about what's happening today is that there's corporate greed and corporate profit happening. Some of these detention centers are for-profit detention centers. When you have profit and power in the hands of some, and they're given unquestioning authority to do whatever they want, there will be serious abuses. The whole idea of privatized detention centers, some of them are operated by corporations with deep political connections, are making millions from this crackdown. They're benefiting directly from the suffering and dehumanization of other people. Think about it. If you're held in a private detention center, the longer you're held there, the more money they make. I mean, detention centers that are private, it's like a hotel. Do they make more money when there's vacancies or when there's full occupancy? The more people in these detention centers and the longer they stay, the more money they make. They have no incentive to get them out of there quickly, and they have no problems with cutting costs on food and medical care and other responsibilities. This is deplorable. Some of the arguments that are made in favor of deporting all of these people is that immigrants detract from our ability to care for the poor that we already have in our country. Now, I'm going to respond to this by saying I don't think that's what most people are saying. That's an argument that might be used, but that's really not their motive. Because let's be honest, most people are really not worried about the poor in our country. They're worried about themselves. The appeal of much of the anti-immigration rhetoric is that immigrants are a threat to us, not that they're a threat to the poor in our country. We don't want them here. There's no evidence that immigrants are taking away jobs from the poor in our country. There may even be a slight positive impact on jobs. Immigrants add to the consumption and therefore they increase the number of jobs. Immigrants actually expand the overall size of the pie. Another argument is that welcoming immigrants is inconsistent with our national security. Here's the reality. When it comes to refugees, those who go through the process of applying, the United States has an incredibly intense vetting policy in place. Those who enter the United States as refugees are already the most thoroughly screened of any category of immigrant there is in the world, perhaps. And since the Refugee Act of 1980, there's not been one single lethal terrorist attack in the United States perpetrated by an individual who's entered the United States through the refugee resettlement program. But some might say that immigrants are responsible for crime, both at the border and throughout our country. The last thing an immigrant wants to do is commit a crime, especially if they're here illegally. They know that they're going to be deported immediately. Here's the reality. If undocumented immigrants actually caused crime, then we would expect the crime rate to rise along with the rise of illegal immigration. They would both rise simultaneously, both nationally and in particular communities. Instead, the actual opposite has been true. From 1990 to 2013, while the number of undocumented immigrants in the United States tripled, the FBI data shows that violent crime fell by 48%. And property crime fell by 41%. Immigrants are not causing an increase in crime. One way to measure the relationship between immigration and crime is by examining incarceration. In 2014, based on the United States Census data, 1.53% of native-born U.S. citizens between the ages of 18 and 54 were incarcerated, but only 0.85% of undocumented immigrants, and only 0.47% of immigrants with legal status in the same age range were incarcerated. The incarceration rate of native-born citizens has doubled, and as much as 5 times as much as that of documented or even undocumented immigrants. What's not being stated here actually is that crimes against illegal immigrants actually is increasing because they're afraid to report it. Now, before I go any further, I want to encourage you to go to the Determined Truth homepage at determinedtruth.com. There you're going to find tabs for events, YouTube, podcasts, blogs, and all kinds of other resources. You can learn about our ministry that we do in India and the pastors that we're training and equipping there. If you go to our YouTube page, you're going to find under the playlist tabs, all the playlists of all the videos and all the live streams that we've been conducting for the last several years. There's over 39 videos on Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank, and there's other videos on introduction to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We've done videos on the Bible and theology, the end times. We've done prophecy, the Bible and the kingdom. But I want you to notice up here at the top, we have the Revelation Revealed series. We also have the Immigration series. And if you click on the View Full playlist, you'll notice that we've done 3 live streams already in this series in which we interviewed scholars and practitioners, especially in Central and South America. And we've asked the question, what's happening in these countries and why are the people fleeing and coming to the United States? I strongly encourage you to watch those videos. Now, one of the more common sets of arguments is that immigrants take vital resources from our country. And the reality is, actually, that's not quite true. Undocumented immigrants pay an estimated $7 billion in taxes. They pay an estimated $3.6 billion in property taxes. But before I go further, let me respond by saying this. We have to first remember why they're coming. Many of them are coming, as we discussed in those other live streams, because of the American policies and American corporate exploitation in their countries, what we've done to them. Our greed for cheap products has created the very poverty and the very violence in their countries that they are trying to flee from. Then when they arrive here, we say, no, sorry, you can't come in. Immigrants do use some resources. That's true. And it varies from state to state. I live in Arizona. There's a lot of immigrants who come over the border to have children, and the hospitals on the border are impacted. There's emergency and prenatal care. There's immunizations and treatment for communicable diseases. Of course, throughout the United States, children of undocumented immigrants are allowed to use our public schools, but immigrants cannot benefit from such things as food stamps, public housing, health insurance, and government assistance. Yet they pay taxes for all those things. Immigrants pay taxes when they go shopping or when they buy gas. They are contributing to the society. So even though they're taking some resources away, and depending on the state, some more than others, for the most part, they are contributing far more than they are taking away from our society. In fact, undocumented immigrants pay an estimated $12 billion in Social Security contributions, yet they can never use that money. They will never get it. As I finish up this series, let me make a couple points. One, I'm not giving a policy on what the United States has to do. I'm simply saying the church needs to speak up against the injustices that are occurring. We need to speak up and defend the rights of those who are needy, those who are oppressed, those who are in danger. We need to encourage our country, don't send them back to the danger, especially when that danger was caused by us and our corporations. Here we are experiencing the profits of cheap products and cheap labor because of what we've done in their countries, and then we won't even care for the people that we've exploited. But I'm also arguing that the church's responsibility is to have compassion and care and concern for those who are hurting, for those who are in need. We don't walk by the man on the road to Jericho and say, legal or illegal? No, we are the Good Samaritan. We love our neighbor as ourselves. And when it comes to the argument of, well, they're affecting our economy, I understand why Americans might say that, but Christians shouldn't. If anyone sees his brother in need but has no compassion on him, how can the love of God be in him? Give without asking anything in return. This is the gospel.